Hi everyone! Welcome back for another episode of STEM Sundays with Emily. Because it is still April, we are doing another sustainable activity today, so I hope you gathered up your cardboard tubes. I did warn you at the end of last week to save some up, but I know that isn't a lot of time to start saving, so if you have to postpone this episode until you have saved up a few cardboard tubes, no worries. But for those of you that have them, great! We're gonna do a really fun activity today. So the activity itself doesn't involve sustainability or the environment. The activity actually is going to be focused on physics, momentum, and energy. But the fact that we're using sustainable materials for the project is why we are featuring it in April this month. So to get into the project, we're going to be building a type of roller coaster or marble drop. So we're going to be exploring how different ramps and different heights of towers can create fast-moving marbles or whatever type of rolling ball or sphere you might have at home. So to get into the materials today, we're going to need, like I mentioned, these cardboard tubes. I got mine from paper towels and toilet paper rolls. I tried getting them from wrapping paper, but it turns out that this isn't really, at least the wrapping paper rolls that I had, the inner core wasn't exactly what we needed. It wasn't as sturdy as these cardboard tubes. So if your wrapping paper rolls are better than mine, feel free to use those. I think that would be a really great material for this project today. But no worries, the paper towels and toilet paper rolls will be perfect. Next, we're going to need some sort of base. This isn't absolutely necessary, but I figured that it might make a lot of sense and help with the project overall. So I'm using the top of a shoebox just because it has this rim around the outside. Since we are going to be using marbles or some sort of ball, I thought it would be nice that it would be captured inside of this lid instead of rolling off the table or rolling around on the floor. So this is not needed, but a little hack that I think would be ideal if you were to have in your projects too. So next you're going to need a pair of scissors. This might need some assembly required by an adult beforehand, but that's okay. Once we get all of the scissor work done, then we'll move on, and that's where kids can jump in if needed. Next, we're going to need some tape, and lastly, we're going to need some sort of ball to use. So in true sustainable fashion, this is not planned. I just couldn't find any sort of ball or like bouncy ball, something. I could not find anything. I think my cats have hidden all my little objects around. So in true sustainable fashion, I'm using a grape tomato today for the activity. So it is exactly what we need in terms of shape and size. I think golf ball would probably be too big for these tubes, but anything smaller than that, marble would be perfect. A bouncy ball would be perfect. Grape tomato, as long as it doesn't get crushed, will be perfect. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it doesn't get squished, but for the activity, unless my cats decide to come and eat it or play with it, we'll be fine using this grape tomato for the activity. So jumping into the assembly of the towers. So this activity involves a series of different heights of towers accompanied by different ramps of different angles. So what we'll be doing is taking a ball or a tomato, if that's what you have at home, dropping it into one tower. It will shoot out into the next tower and then drop and shoot into the next tower. And that will be how we explore the idea of momentum and physics in general. So like I mentioned, the idea behind this does involve energy and momentum. So one of the rules of physics and the laws of physics actually is something in motion will tend to want to stay in motion unless it's stopped by some sort of force. So if you have a rolling ball, it's going to want to keep rolling forever. But things like gravity, friction, things like that will keep the ball from not rolling on forever and ever, and eventually it will stop. Obviously, if you have some sort of object that blocks it from rolling, it will stop too. But that is one of the basic rules of physics, and we're going to be exploring that today. Also, in terms of energy, we are going to be looking at how potential energy turns into kinetic energy. So when we have the ball up on top, with more height comes more potential energy, and that's just stored up energy. So the higher it goes, the more energy potentially is stored inside of it, so that when it falls, that will turn into kinetic energy, and as it moves, that potential energy turns into kinetic energy. And by the very end, you will have 100% kinetic energy, 0% potential energy, while at the top, way before your experiment, you have 100% potential energy, 0% kinetic energy, because it hasn't even moved yet. So those are some of the ideas that are going to be covered in this project today. So let's get into building it. So first, you're going to need your towers. So each tube is going to count as a tower unless you want to cut these down. I'm only going to cut one of these down so that we have two different heights, and that is key to this project today, unless you want to play around with cutting holes through these, which go for it, but I'm not going to try that today. So the number of tubes you have corresponds to the number of towers, and if, like I mentioned, if you want to cut these and make mini towers, I wanted to make a somewhat tall tower, so that's why I'm using the 2 paper towels for this tower portion. Next, you're going to need, you can use, if you have the paper towel rolls or the toilet paper rolls, you could also use the paper towel rolls too. These will be our ramps. So one thing to keep in mind when you're building your towers and placing them on your base is that depending on which roll you use for your ramp, depends on how close together your towers can be. So actually looking at this, just for an example, before we get building, as we start laying this out, just some creative things to think about before you lay out your towers is that because our ramps will be so short, I think I actually might use the shorter one and a taller one, and then use a long ramp to connect them. That's one option. You could also cut this down to make two, one tall tower and one short tower, and then again use the short tube to use as your ramp. And if you have all tall tubes, feel free to cut them down. If you have all short tubes, might be a little bit hard, but you can always tape them together to form a taller tower. So regardless of which types of tubes you have, you'll be perfect for the activity today. I actually think I'm going to go back to the 2 tall towers and use one small ramp in the middle so we can see what that looks like. All right, so first I'm going to just cut this one tube down a little bit. I'm probably cutting 3 inches off of it, I would say, off the one end. Like our winch activity, if you want to be accurate in your measurements, feel free to get a ruler out and a pencil and mark off where you're cutting. But I think because the heights aren't so specific and don't matter that much, it's fine if they're not entirely the same length, at least these cuts that you're making. Alrighty, so we're cutting. You can probably hear my cats in the background. Oh, here she is. She brought me a toy. Okay, here we go. Say hi, Toots. Everyone knows you now. Okay, goodbye. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so now we have our shortened tube next to our original tall tube. And again, if you watched and did our winch activity, we're going to do a same sort of base structure. So you're going to want to cut 4 cuts in the bottom of each of your towers. And she's back. This is not going to work, but she might not like this activity as much as the bridges, so we could be okay. So we're going to make 4 cuts in the bottom to form a solid structure. Here we go. Okay. Move, please. You're going to have to move. Get down. Okay, so now we have our base cut out so that now it will rest flat on our surface, and now we can just tape it down. Okay. Move. Okay, so we're just gonna keep going and pretend that she isn't there. But, so we have our one tube, we have the 4 pieces cut into it so that it will stand straight on its own. And what we're going to do now is do the same to the other. I didn't realize I hadn't done both tubes. So again, make 4 cuts along the bottom of the tube, and then just fold them back so that you have little squares popping up. There we go. So we have our second structure, and actually what we're going to do now is cut holes into the cardboard, which will definitely require adult supervision, but I think it's going to make the towers and the activity a little bit cooler. So I just am cutting, and with the taller tube, you're gonna want the hole to be a little bit higher up, and you're going to want it to be about the same size as the cardboard tubes themselves. I'll show you once I get this cut up. Almost there. We'll give this to Tootsie and maybe she'll leave us alone. Okay. Down she goes. Perfect. So I have this hole cut in. I originally thought that we might be able to do this without cutting holes in the towers, but now that I'm laying this out and looking at it, I think it'll be definitely more fun this way, even though it does require a little bit more for the adults if you don't want your children or students to be using sharp scissors. So again, we're just gonna pretend the cat is in there and keep moving on. So, okay, so we have our one tube and we have our next. Now we're going to need to cut another hole in here. All right. Just another circle, same sort of size as before. Here we go. Ready? It's a toy. Alrighty. There we go. All right, now, lastly, we're going to need probably one more hole in the very bottom of our small tube. I'm gonna do one more hole, and this will be our exit point for whatever type of ball we are using, whether that be a marble or a ping pong ball or a tomato. Say hello to everyone, Toots. You have some big fans out there. Okay, ready? Another toy. Okay, so we have the tall tube with one cutout in it. We have our smaller tube with a cutout on one side that is up high and one side that is down low. So now what we're going to do, before we tape these down, is we're going to cut our ramps and make sure that everything is aligned perfectly before we tape it down. So to make our ramps, we're just going to cut the small tube in half. so that we have two basically slides. All right, there we go. So now we have two little chutes that we'll use for the ball to roll down. And now what we're going to do is it should just stick right in here, and then it will attach down in here. So you're gonna need to play around depending on where you cut the holes in your towers. You're going to need to just play around and make sure that you have enough room, and I think that'll be perfect. You can just tape that down a little bit. So I'm going to do this so that you can see the exit of the tomato. So I'm gonna, now that I've laid this out a little bit, I'm going to tape down the tubes so that they can stand on their own without me holding on to them. Just a little bit of tape. This is probably the only non-sustainable part, but if you wanted to get creative and figure out a way to keep the towers from standing on their own without tape, or finding an alternative to tape, that might be a great idea. Another way to make this project a little bit more sustainable. So one other thing before I tape the small tower down, you're going to want to make sure that your ramp is all the way to the back of the tall tube, because when we start, we're going to drop this down, and we don't want our ball to fall right through the tower. We want to make sure that it falls and hits the ramp. So I'm actually going to put a piece of tape here just so that I know my ramp won't move. There we go. Perfect. Here, I'll show you. So what I mean is that when your object falls through, it'll directly hit our ramp here. It won't fall all the way through. It's just gonna hit the ramp and continue down. So now I'm going to put this in here and tape down our second tower. So you wanna make sure that they're lined up so that the ramp will fall or direct the ball into the hole of the second tower. And this one, you want to make sure that actually the ramp doesn't go through the tower, because what it's going to do is it's going to go from the tall tower, hit the ramp, follow the ramp into the second tower, and then it's going to drop until it hits our last ramp, and then it will exit out this hole in the bottom here. So I just need one more piece of tape to stabilize our second tower. Perfect. Okay, and then lastly, we're going to take our second ramp, and this one, like the first ramp, we want to make sure that it extends all the way to the back of the second tower. These cats are having a field day today. Okay, so here we go. We have our contraption all set up. We have our tall tower. The ramp is pushed all the way through this hole to the back of the tall tower. Then it's directed into the tall hole, the highest hole on the little tower. Doesn't have to be all the way into the tower. We want it just directing the ball into the hole. Then we have our last ramp, which is pushed all the way to the back so that it will catch the falling object and allows it to fall out here. Okay, so now we're going to try this and see if it works. So we have our object, mine again, grape tomato. We're going to take it, and remember up here, it has 100% potential energy. as soon as we release it, it's going to start converting into kinetic energy. And kinetic energy is just the energy an object has while it's moving. So 100% potential at the top. By the end, whenever it stops rolling, it will have used all of its potential energy, converted it to kinetic energy, and that is the process that's going on here, okay? So here we go. We're going to drop the tomato. I should probably tape the second ramp. Actually, we're gonna do a rerun. This is what experimenting is all about though. You wanna see what works, what doesn't work. So what didn't work for me is that the ramp did not connect to the second tower. So when I released the tomato, it wasn't able to get into the hole. So I just want to tape this down. And feel free to do the same sort of back and forth experimenting at home with your projects. You don't have to build it exactly the same way that I am. I probably would recommend trying a different way just because it's more fun. So, and as you could see, the tomato was caught in the shoebox, so instead of it rolling off the table, using the shoebox lid was able to capture it and make sure that it didn't run and go willy-nilly. So let's try one more time. We're going to drop our tomato. I think my tomato is just a little bit too big. It's getting caught, you can see, right here. But it just has to get, we just have to push our ramp down or push the tomato through. Ooh. My ramp was taller than the lid. So we're gonna try this one more time. Toots wants to see it happen. Ready, Toots? Here we go. We're gonna drop it. And should probably tape this too. So that ended up really not working as well as I'd hoped, but I think with a little bit more practice and back and forth and just some modifications to the setup, I think it would be really fun. And like I said, if you have wrapping paper tubes, you can make them really tall and build multiple ramps down, back and forth. So I'm gonna try that and maybe post a follow-up video. I think that would be really fun. But I wanna know what you guys think of this activity. Hopefully you can build yours a little bit better than I just built mine, and maybe have something better than a tomato for your object. So next week, we're going to be doing snap circuits because it's the last weekend of April already. Even though it's not a sustainable project, it is the last week of April, so I do like keeping with that snap circuits tradition that I've started for the last weekend to always be snap circuits. So get your kits ready. We're going to be doing 1 or maybe 2 activities using the snap circuits kit. And like I said, hopefully I'll be able to post some sort of follow-up and better video, maybe with a really extravagant and fun setup to this. So stay tuned for that. Let me know how your towers worked out, and I hope you learned a little bit something today and enjoyed the cat appearances too. So have a great weekend, everyone. Hopefully next week we'll be a little bit more organized, but have a good one. I'll see you guys.